This is Ask the Governor on the Louisiana Radio Network.
Thank you, Michelle Southern. I'm Jim Inkster, your moderator, and Michelle is ready to take your calls at 877-217-5757. This is the 14th Ask the Governor show for Governor John Bel Edwards, who appears with us every third Wednesday, and the session is in full bloom, and we'll talk with him about that and more. And once again, your number is 877-217-5757. We do ask that you listen, and Michelle is keeping track. We know people are engaged about any number of issues, and we're going to try to limit the calls to one issue. And so if an issue has been covered, Michelle will politely ask you to ask something else, or maybe you'll go back and listen to the show on our podcast. 877-217-5757. Governor, it's a session that has been interesting. 3 weeks to go, 3 weeks and a day, and a lot of work remaining to be done.
Well, a tremendous amount of work needs to be done, and you know, time is closing out on us. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed at how far behind the legislature is, particularly in the House. You know, this is the last fiscal session before the cliff, and we call it the cliff because on July 1st of 2018. $1.3 billion in revenue is just gone because of the short-term approach taken last year. And because of that, this is our best opportunity to address it, achieve the stability, the predictability that we need, and make sure that everybody understands what the situation is going to be. As of right now, there has not been anything that has moved out of the House of Representatives that in any way addresses that cliff. And there's certainly time. I think there's enough instruments pending in Ways and Means, but quite frankly, at this point in time, if something hasn't come out of committee already, it gets very difficult to get it all the way through the process. And that's unfortunate. You know, hopefully we won't need one, but every day it looks more and more likely we'll have to have a special session at some point before the regular session next year.
Yesterday, a measure did clear a House committee by a close vote for a gasoline tax, and it included some Republican support. What are your thoughts about the prospects of this?
Well, you know, it's difficult. Anytime you have a revenue-raising measure, it's difficult because it requires a two-thirds vote, and to get that level of support for revenue is awfully hard. I will tell you that the bill that's authored by Representative Stephen Carter from Baton Rouge is important. It's very consistent with the task force report. You know, we've got significant issues on transportation funding. The 16-cent gas tax that we have to support operations in Louisiana to preserve and maintain and to increase capacity roads and bridges, but this is also ports and airports and multimodal transportation needs. That 16 cents was put on the books 30 years ago. It's really worth 7.5 cents today once you factor in inflation. And that makes it very, very difficult. And one of the biggest challenges that we have is with the revenue that we're currently producing for the State Transportation Trust Fund through the gas tax, it is insufficient to draw down the federal dollars available through the Federal Transportation Trust Fund because there is always a non-federal match to get those dollars down to the state level. There's $43 million needed from state general fund to supplement that, but as of right now, it's not even in the budget. We had a plan to put it in the budget. The House chose not to, and if we don't do something about that, that's $200 million that we will leave on the table total for that could have gone to our transportation infrastructure just in the next fiscal year. So we've got a serious problem that we have to fix. We'll never get to another mega project without additional revenue, such as the new bridge here across the Mississippi River, you know, trying to do I-49 South, some of the other major things that we need to get to. And so I'm hopeful that the legislature will come together and that the House will find a way to find the two-thirds vote to get that bill passed.
Today's headline in The Advocate: Governor reaches a jail reform deal.
Yeah, that's a really big deal. You know, the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Task Force was created by legislation during Governor Jindal's last year. And that task force met and did the most exhaustive study of our criminal justice system ever, aided by folks like the Pew Charitable Trust, the Pelican Institute out of New Orleans, but with a lot of interest from the business community across Louisiana, the religious community, folks in both houses of the legislature, and we knew we had a problem. I mean, we spend more than $700 million a year on corrections to house the largest, to have the largest incarceration rate in the country. But yet our crime rate is not any better as a result. And so we know we have to do something better. And by focusing on nonviolent offenders and nonviolent crimes, we're going to be able to realize the overwhelming majority of the savings. I think it's like 83% of the savings that the task force came up with. This final package is going to realize, and that's where they compromise with the sheriffs and the DAs. The DAs are in full support of the package, and that is not easy to come by. We have worked extremely hard, and I thank Pete Adams and all the folks at the District Attorneys Association. But this is something we have to do to move our state forward. And I want to emphasize, Jim, we're not rolling the dice here. These reforms are consistent with what other Southern conservative states have done over the last number of years, all with success. And so we're going to enhance public safety. We're going to incarcerate fewer people. We're going to save and reinvest money to make sure that they do reenter society more effectively, and meaning that there's less recidivism. Every time somebody gets out of prison and reoffends, there's another victim of crime. We have to do better.
Last month on this show, when you were asked about the monuments in New Orleans, you stated you thought it was a local issue.
Yeah.
Now there's been a bill that has cleared the House that involves preserving monuments with military heroes attached to them from various wars. And it's something that the Senate will have to weigh. It's gaining a lot of attention. What do you think?
It is gaining a lot of attention. And, you know, I've been in Baton Rouge associated with state government now for 10 years. The debate I saw on the House floor the night before last, probably the most divisive, contentious, emotional debate, and it's regrettable that happened because I sense that it's going to take a while for people to come back together, and our needs are too great in Louisiana. We're not going to solve them if we're divided. My thoughts on the issue haven't changed. At the end of the day, and especially if you're looking at New Orleans, but simple fact of the matter is I don't think there's any way that this bill could possibly become law in time to impact the situation in New Orleans as it relates to the monuments that have been already designated for removal. But you're looking at a situation where you've got monuments that are owned by the city, on city property, and the city council and mayor have decided that they want to remove them. Both state and federal courts have looked at the process that they went through and the decision that they've made and have said that the city can proceed. I don't know what role the state has to play in that.
Governor said a busy month, and there isn't a whole lot of time for other things, but you did make a trip to the Jazz Fest.
I did. Spent Saturday afternoon down there. You know, it's one of the biggest festivals in the state of Louisiana. I think it may be the biggest. And by the crowds we had there that Saturday, when perfect weather allowed folks to come out from all over Louisiana, but I met people really from all over the country. Anyway, it was showcasing some of the best things about Louisiana, the music, and an awful lot of good food there as well.
877-217-5757. We start with Anthony in Metairie. Good afternoon, Anthony. You're on Ask the Governor.
Greetings and salutations, most noble Governor John Edwards. You are an answer to prayer. Thank you for your fight. Thank you for trying to get that bill passed to raise the minimum wage. I've been in this American workforce since 1977. I was washing cars for $5.25 an hour in 1977. In that time, Congress has passed laws to guarantee them automatic raises. Congressmen like Senator Larry Craig make $200,000 a year, get 3 months paid vacation, get essentially free health care, while I am required to work for $7 an hour.
$7.25, I think, is minimum wage.
It is. Well, Anthony, first of all, thank you very much for the call. The minimum wage is $7.25. It has been since 2009. And quite frankly, in 2017, I don't think that that's a meaningful wage. we have a lot of people who work for the minimum wage. And contrary to what some people think, they're not all people working their way through high school or through college. We have an awful lot of people who are supporting themselves and in many cases their families on minimum wage, which means that they have to work multiple jobs. I just think we can and should do better. My proposal is to increase the minimum wage to $8.50 over 2 years, which, by the way, happens to be the Arkansas minimum wage. And I know that the overwhelming majority of people in Louisiana support it. We did get that bill out of the Senate Labor Committee this morning. It goes to the Senate floor. And so hopefully this year will be the year when they will move that bill successfully over to the House, and we get it through the House as well. It's important. But thank you, Anthony, for the call.
Patricia in Church Point. Good afternoon, Patricia. Patricia, you're on Ask the Governor.
Yes, my name is Patricia Spears. I'm 53 years old, and I live in Church Point, Louisiana. I'm calling about House Bill 592, the workers' comp bill. I am, sir, a victim of workers' comp. I did not choose worker comp. My employer did. For the last 9 years, it's been a battle, not getting the care I needed, the care being delayed, being followed, drugs being cut off, and now I'm told that you're trying to put us along the Texas lines of how they do. I think that you should meet with people like myself that work every day and pay taxes.
Well, Patricia, I'm not, first of all, I'm sitting here in the studio. I don't have House Bill 592 in front of me. But I will tell you that when it relates to matters like civil justice and workers' compensation, I don't believe I have ever supported moving to anything that's closer to what Texas has. And so I will have to have somebody get more information, and we'll call you back. But there is no bill that I'm supporting that in any way prejudices or makes it worse for injured workers to be able to get the compensation that they should be due. So I'm thinking that your information is incorrect. I will get more information and get back with you, however.
James in Longview, Texas. Thank you, Patricia. James, you're on Ask the Governor.
Well, hi there, Jim, and good afternoon, Governor. Anyhow, I'll be brief. Anyhow, I heard of your proposal just now, Governor, and I've heard of it in preceding days about reducing Louisiana's incarceration rate and save money, and I totally agree with your premise there. I see the total logic in cost versus benefit, but is there any slight twinge in your mind about the benefit versus risk ratio? I know it's low risk offenders, but just suppose somebody does get out and say do a drug-induced DUI and kill somebody. Does that ever cross your mind that somebody might get out that we wish they hadn't been released?
Well, James, what we know is 95% of the people in prison today are getting out. They're just getting out after serving longer, and they're not getting the help that they need, whether it's mental illness treatments, addiction disorder treatments, or the education or skills training that they need to be able to get a job and be successful. And the changes that we're making are those that have already been implemented in other southern conservative states with success. They're not just saving money and lowering their incarceration rates. They're actually having less crime as a result of it. I believe what we're doing will create fewer crime victims and save us money all at the same time. That has been the experience in other states that have done these things, and so I'm very confident about it. Now, I mean, as governor, I worry about a lot of things, and certainly I worry about whether people who get out of prison are going to reoffend. But for all the reasons that I just mentioned to you, that I think this is something we have to do. And I'll repeat, we have the highest incarceration rate in the nation. We spend more than $700 million a year on our Department of Corrections, and we are not safer as a result. And the package that we put together is a compromise package where the DAs and the sheriffs were at the table with us. And in fact, the district attorneys, traditionally the hardest group to get to come on board for this type of legislation, actually are in support. They're not neutral. They're in support of what we're doing. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm very confident that we're doing the right thing.
Keith in La Place. Thank you, James. Keith, you're on Ask the Governor with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hey, Governor, nice to talk to you. I just wanted to compliment you. You've been handling yourself with a lot of grace, and it's really refreshing to see someone that is really putting the public back in the public service. I mean, I got to say, I'm a Republican, but the way you handled yourself and considering what's going on with Trump and the Russia stuff, frankly, I switched my party registration. I'm back to Democrat. I mean, I just think you handled yourself the way that we would want an executive of the state or of the United States to handle themselves with good convictions, and you're I'm not always on the exact page with you on your proposals, but you're eloquent in the way you put them together, and I'm glad to have an LSU law graduate in there too.
Thank you, Keith.
877-217-5757. Jennifer in Baton Rouge. Jennifer, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hi. I have a question about state employee raises. My employees start off making $10.26 an hour. They have to have a college degree. We have not seen merits in 10 years. Walmart pays more than that, and we make a third of what industry makes. When are y'all going to start helping state employees?
Well, Jennifer, first of all, thank you. I appreciate your service to the state. And I know that just recently we had State Employee Appreciation Week. So I extend that appreciation to all the employees around the state. Look, it is very difficult. We actually have in our executive budget proposal to the legislature, we identified about $24 million that we thought we needed to have a salary adjustment for individuals across the state. To this point, that money has not been appropriated by the legislature for that purpose. And it is something that we have to do. Now, I think in any given year, or you can go a year or two, and because of tough budget constraints, you can choose not to fund certain things like merit raises for state employees. But when you go years and years and years without doing that, you create a real problem for the state, and I think that's where we are. And so I sympathize with you. We are working to try very hard to get the legislature to incorporate a small but meaningful increase for state workers. But at this point, I'm sad to tell you that it is not in the budget bill.
Thank you, Jennifer. Kathy in Metairie. Good afternoon, Kathy. You're on with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Good afternoon, Governor Edwards. I want to let you know I do appreciate your support on behalf of families with disabilities, and I am greatly concerned about roughly 9 years of budget cuts that seem to hit the Department of Health the most. But I was wondering about our nursing home industry and the long-term care policies. Are those going to be addressed, such as, it's my understanding nursing homes still are reimbursed for empty beds, and while there was legislation to try to implement a managed care system through insurance companies, is there any way to implement some type of in-house managed care to make sure we utilize home and community-based services before relegating someone to a nursing home?
Well, Kathy, thank you for the call. And with respect to the budget cuts on the Department of Health, they have been severe. Now, we're doing some good things at the Department of Health, and one of those is the Medicaid expansion that is not only providing coverage in care to about 420,000 working adults in Louisiana, it's saving $200 million this year, State General Fund, and will save $300 million next year. But the budget that was put together by the House of Representatives in a very irresponsible fashion would actually cut about $720 million out of healthcare this year. That is a non-starter for me. That budget will never become law, but it goes to tell you how much work we have to do in Louisiana so that we can take care of the least among us, as I think we're all obligated to. Now, with respect to the long-term care policies, I don't believe it's technically correct to say that we pay nursing homes for empty beds. There's a cost reimbursement that is part of the funding formula, but in a lot of times it's been cast as paying for empty beds. I don't think that's exactly accurate. I will tell you that there is going to be some movement on this front, at least in part, because we have we are working right now with the U.S. Department of Justice and all the stakeholders, to include the nursing home industry in Louisiana, to address a situation where it appears that the federal government wants us to reduce the number of individuals in nursing homes whose primary diagnosis has to do with mental illness. We're working through that now, and we're going to have to work towards a consent judgment. So that will in part address the concerns that you're talking about. There are about 4,000, I think, residents that they've identified that they're concerned about in this regard. And I think the number is a little less than 4,000, but at the end of the day, there will be some movement. And now, with respect to going to long-term managed care, as I've said all along, it's something that I'm open to. I will note that a minority of states have actually done it. 19 states have done it across the country. My concern with it is that I need to be absolutely certain that before we place an insurance company between the state and the provider, that we're not taking money away from the provider that would otherwise be spent on the residents who need the care.
Leroy from Alexandria. Good afternoon, Leroy. You're on with the governor.
Hello, Governor. Thank you for taking our calls. And I want to know the status and the situation on roads and bridges in Louisiana that need to be fixed, repaired, and some roads need to be 4-lane because there's so much traffic on it because they're just 2-lane roads right now. Do you have any plans for all this taking place?
Leroy, thank you for the call. If I understood you correctly, you're talking about roads and bridges in Louisiana, and I assume particularly in the Alexandria area, that need to be repaired. And also, I think you were talking about some capacity issues where you've got 2-lane roads that I think you want to be expanded to 4-lane roads and so forth. It's clearly a priority of ours. It's very difficult to do because we have an eroding base, and when it comes to the revenue that we generate for the State Transportation Trust Fund. As I mentioned earlier, almost 30 years ago, the gas tax was imposed at 16 cents. Because of inflation, it's worth 7.5 cents today. And that's not enough to address the transportation infrastructure that we need. And not all of it is roads and bridges. Some of it is ports and airports and so forth, but the vast majority is roads and bridges. We're not preserving and maintaining the way that we should, and we're certainly not adding the capacity that we need to add. And there is an opportunity before the legislature right now to take a giant step forward. We need to do better in order to enhance the quality of life for everyone, to make sure that business knows that commerce moves in Louisiana. There are certain corridors that where, quite frankly, it's not moving very well. I-10 in the south part of the state, for example, east to west movement, at certain points in the day, both in New Orleans, but particularly in New Orleans, in Baton Rouge, traffic comes to a halt. And increasing capacity, especially around bridges, is extremely expensive. We've got capacity needs down on I-49 south of Lafayette going to New Orleans. Other mega projects like a bridge on I-10 in Lake Charles that needs to be replaced. So we've got a lot of work to do. But I guess, Leroy, the biggest, not the biggest need, but one of the things that's most indicative of the trouble that we're in is right now we're not generating enough for our State Transportation Trust Fund to even draw down all of the federal transportation trust funds. So we're paying federal gas taxes that we may not be bringing into Louisiana. And we're not talking about an insubstantial amount. We could leave a total of $200 million on the table if we don't make some adjustment. And right now I can tell you the budget is not in order when it comes to drawing down what's available from Washington, D.C. for our highways.
Vicki in Monroe. Good afternoon, Vicki. You're on with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hi, Governor. We have a situation that is worsening by the day here in Ouachita Parish, and our local officials refuse to help us. Most of the time, our water is not fit to drink, bathe in, or cook with, and our meters are not even read on a regular basis by the company, which causes our bills to be sometimes in the hundreds of dollars. Isn't there something the state can do to make sure this company provides us with safe drinking water?
Now, Vicki, I'm assuming you are not in the city of Monroe or West Monroe.
I'm in Ouachita Parish.
Okay, so what I'll have to do is get you to stay on, and Tucker will get your name and contact information. But make sure we know what water system you're on, because when it comes to water quality, we do have the State Department of Health, and in fact, it's the Office of Public Health that monitors water quality, and we do go out and test. And certainly we can take a look at that. And as far as whether there are other problems with your water provider, I'm willing to take a look at that as well. I will tell you, water needs are surfacing around the state, and we have, it's just like neglected transportation infrastructure. We've had neglected water systems for a long time, and obviously we can't have unsafe drinking water, and so I would ask you to give Tucker that information so we can call you back.
Marcia in Mandeville. Marcia, good afternoon. You're on with the governor.
Hi, my name's Marcia. I'm from Mandeville. First, I'd like to say thank you for everything you've done for our state. I'm proud to call you my governor.
Thank you, Marcia.
I've heard about this program. I guess there's a GPS program in all state vehicles, and from what I've heard about it, it sounds like it was pretty expensive to install, where I guess it tracks state vehicles and if state employees are speeding in these vehicles. I guess, just curious if you had any insight on who monitors that data and how that spending is put to good use, or just any insight. I feel like a little naive on that, and I'm just curious.
Well, Marcia, thank you for the call. I don't believe we have a statewide policy that requires GPS in all state vehicles. There are certain state agencies, law enforcement agencies, where the majority of the vehicles do have GPS in them, and for example, maybe the state police vehicles or the fire marshal vehicles. And I will tell you that it would be expensive to put a GPS in every vehicle, and probably not warranted. But for those agencies that have particular needs, not just on checking to find out how fast the vehicles might be traveling or where they are, but if you're engaged in delivering public safety services, a lot of times you're interacting with an element in Louisiana that you just want to be able to know where those vehicles are for safety reasons, and also if the vehicle happens to be taken. But I will get with the Commissioner of Administration and find out which agencies have this policy and which ones don't, and try to get some information back to you. So I'm going to ask you to spend some time with Tucker to give him your contact information also.
877-217-5757. Daniel in Gretna. Hello, Daniel. You're on with Governor Edwards.
Yes, hello, Governor. I just wanted to call and speak briefly on behalf of the film industry here in Louisiana and try to illustrate my own experience. I'm a Louisiana native, born and raised, grew up in New Orleans, live in Gretna now. I've been in the film industry for over 15 years, and I work in set decoration as a buyer, so I purchase assets for each film production. And I can tell you that as an individual, I've probably spent like $50,000 to $100,000 of film production money here in this state, just me in my position. And there's one of me in every department of every production, so wardrobe, props, construction, on and on. There's people spending money in this state. I own my own home. I pay, state and city taxes that, if I wasn't in the film industry, if I wasn't making a union wage with union benefits, I'd probably be a renter, and I'd probably be living somewhere else. So.
Well, Daniel, thank you very much for the call. And obviously you support the Motion Picture Investor Tax Credit, and we're in the process of explaining what it means to you and what you contribute to the state and to local government. We have a bill that J.P. Morrell, the Senate Chairman of Revenue and Fisc, is carrying that seeks to preserve that tax credit, keeps the back-end cap at $180 million, over time switches to a front-end cap, but more importantly, it makes changes within the program to try to make sure that we have more emphasis on creating an indigenous industry, that there's more employment of Louisianans, and I guess in short, that produces a better return on investment for the state, and make sure that we don't grow that program over time beyond what we can afford to pay for it. But the $180 million cap would stay in place. I think that would provide the stability and the predictability that the industry is looking for from our state, so that they remain engaged here, and that your industry will actually do better going forward than it has over the past year or so.
Thank you, Daniel. We're about a minute from going to another break. And before we go there, Governor, it was 10 years ago that you decided to enter the political realm. You ran for the State House and won. Lots happened in a decade, but how has how have the politics evolved over that time?
Well, I will tell you, not for the better in terms of the partisanship that we now see in Baton Rouge. I do believe that we are better than Washington, D.C. We are not Washington yet, but we are headed that way, it appears to me, with a lot of outside third-party interest groups that really put pressure on legislators to behave in a certain way. A lot more partisanship involved now than 10 years ago, or even 4 years ago, to be very honest with you. And we're not being well served by it. I'll just give you this example. There are 43, I think it is, Democrats in the State House of Representatives. And on the Appropriations Committee, you have 19 Republicans and 6 Democrats. I mean, we've never had money committees stacked like that. I mean, the differential is twice what the body as a whole would tell you is fair. But we've got a leadership there that seems to be uninterested in fairness.
The governor is in his 14th show, and he's been in office now for 16 months. So it's been quite a baptism for the governor. And last August, the historic flooding afflicted many in our state, particularly in the Baton Rouge area. How's the comeback coming?
Well, Jim, we are certainly moving forward as fast as possible, and we've got some exciting things that are going on. And I understand that homeowners are frustrated, as well they should be, because it takes too long to navigate that federal bureaucracy. But last month, we finally got the line of credit funded. We immediately started spending the money to get the necessary environmental reviews done. This month, we will start work on 58 homes in terms of the rebuild. And then we will ramp up greatly from there going forward. We've got about 23,000 homeowners that have completed the survey. This is a necessary first step to determine eligibility for the program, and really want people to register for the survey. And the reason is, I think a lot of folks think that if they registered with FEMA that they're covered for this survey, but that's not true. This is not a FEMA program at all. This is a program administered by HUD with a separate pot of money and separate eligibility requirements. And so I'm encouraging everybody who sustained damage to their homes because of the floods in March and or in August of last year to go to restore.la.gov, restore.la.gov on the internet to complete the survey, or to call 866-735-2001, 866-735-2001, Monday through Saturday, 7 to 7, to complete that survey. We do have about $1.6 billion. The latest appropriation from Congress only included $400 million for the entire country. We think we may get about $200 million of that to add for our recovery efforts, but clearly we have a ways to go in getting Congress to appropriate the full unmet needs so that we can fully recover.
Harvey in New Orleans. Good afternoon, Harvey. You're on the air with the governor.
Governor, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And actually, I am calling on the subject that you just spoke about, which was the recent flooding in southeast Louisiana last summer. You may know that there was a bill on the floor introduced by Senator White, Senate Bill 132, which would allow the clearing, snagging, and dredging of scenic rivers. And these rivers include the Amite River, the Comite River, Bayou Manchac, Chafuncta River, Bogaflaya, and Abita River. And as someone who grew up near the Amite River, I know you're very concerned about retaining the scenic quality of these rivers, and that the kind of dredging and snagging and clearing that's taken place in the past has disrupted the scenic quality, not to mention the habitat on many of these rivers. So I'm wondering whether you would support an alternative to this bill, which would actually undertake a comprehensive flooding study of the areas that did undergo such severe flooding, with an intent of hopefully putting in land use regulations that would restrict development in the floodplains to begin with, and that this existing bill is more short-sighted and perhaps counterproductive.
Well, Harvey, first of all, thank you for the call. I did grow up in Amite, but it's the Tangipahoa River that flows through Amite. The Amite River actually goes over towards the Denham Springs and Baton Rouge area, but I am familiar with that river as well. And I know that Senator White certainly has the best of intentions. A lot of rivers, as you probably know, have become shallower and wider. They simply don't carry as much water as they used to. And some attribute the recent increase in flooding to that problem. Now, you will be happy to know that the state has undertaken a comprehensive statewide flood study, and it's a partnership between GOSEP and DOTD and the Office of Community Development on the state side and FEMA to make sure that we do make evidence-based decisions before we go out and spend money to hopefully beneficially impact drainage and to alleviate flooding. So we are doing that, and it will include the rivers that you mentioned. And I do know that the bill has been filed, and we're going to work our way through the process. But I know that Senator White, whose district is in North Baton Rouge, certainly has the best of intentions, and hopefully we can arrive at the right place.
Blake in New Orleans. Thank you, Harvey. Blake, you're on with the governor. Okay, let's try Jessica in New Orleans. Jessica, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor.
Hi, Governor. Thank you so much for taking the call. What are your thoughts on the short-sightedness of HB1 eliminating affordable community-based options for mental health? Many of these individuals are likely to end up in some type of institution or prison or out of work because they can't get the help that they need. So ultimately, there's really not a savings for the state there, and it certainly...
Well, Jessica, thank you for the call. I think I've mentioned it earlier on this show, but the House Bill 1, as it came from the House of Representatives, is a non-starter for me. It is a terribly irresponsible document. It lacks courage. Individuals who prescribed the cuts didn't even have the courage to specify where they would occur. Rather, they just told me and Commissioner of Administration Jay Darden to go do that. Now, the fact of the matter is that budget, if we were to implement it, and we're not going to, would cut about $750 million out of health care in Louisiana, and the types of programs that you just mentioned, things that we can ill afford to do, and quite frankly, things that we need to do and we can. We're working through that now, working with the Senate, and we'll continue to work with the House leadership and rank and file members too, because at the end of the day, there has to be agreement between the two bodies. So we're working through that. I think at the end of the day, you're going to see a budget for next year that does not have that level of cuts, but I cannot predict to you today that there won't be any, because we have a very, very difficult budget year next year, as well as what we've been going through in the past. But the good news is, yesterday the Revenue Estimating Conference met, and for the first time in a long time, basically held stable the forecast of revenue for next year rather than going backwards. And so, Jessica, we're in a much better place than we were last year, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Chris in Baton Rouge. Thank you, Jessica. Chris, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Just wanted to say, so proud to have you as our governor. It's one of the best and easiest votes I ever cast. But my question was about the congressional health care plan that just passed, excuse me, in Congress. Do you have any internal or outside early analysis on what that would Louisiana and Louisiana citizens, and are you speaking about making changes to that bill, or how's that all going?
Well, Chris, first of all, thank you for the call. And the bill that you're talking about is very important to the future of our state and really to the future of the country. And I understand that there were a lot of problems around the Affordable Care Act, also called Obamacare. And almost without exception, when you hear people in the national discussion talking about Obamacare and its problems, they're talking about the exchanges. The Medicaid expansion is what we've done in Louisiana since I've been governor. I will tell you, it's working better than anyone anticipated at covering people, about 420,000 working adults now, saving $200 million this year in state general fund. It'll save $300 million next year, but literally saving lives as well. And yes, to answer your question, there has been analysis done by different groups that indicate that up to 24 million people will lose health care coverage over the next 10 years should that become law. There's no doubt in my mind that there will be several 100,000 in Louisiana who would lose health care coverage, primarily through losing coverage through the Medicaid expansion, which would be bad for the state, both in terms of our individuals and families, but also for the state itself. And we are working with Congress, and I've met with the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I've offered to President Trump and to others to sit down and bring our perspective to the table so that if they ever get to repealing and replacing it, that the replacement is a reasonable facsimile of what we currently have. But what's in the bill that the House of Representatives passed in Washington, there is no doubt in my mind that it would cause several 100,000 people in Louisiana to lose health care coverage.
We are inside 2 minutes, so please be brief. Ann in Baton Rouge, you'll be our final caller for Governor Edwards today. Hi, Ann.
Okay, thank you for taking my call. I would like to know what, in general, discussions you are having with our two senators, Senator Cassidy and Senator Kennedy.
About, well, first of all, I do talk to Senator Cassidy and Senator Kennedy about a number of issues, most recently primarily around our ongoing flood recovery needs in Louisiana. And Senator Kennedy is on the Senate Appropriations Committee, and he's very well positioned to help there, and he is helping. Senator Cassidy is leading a bipartisan effort in the Senate to come up with a bill that would be acceptable to both sides to reform health care in the United States of America. And so that's something that he and I have discussed, and I've actually read a draft copy of his bill. And I was excited to see that he and Susan Collins have had a meeting with about 10 senators, Republicans and Democrats, moderates, trying to find a way forward and to be bipartisan. And so he and I do have those conversations, and I appreciate his work.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you, Governor Edwards. We'll be back next month.
Thank you.
Third Wednesday, so don't miss it. Until then, thanks for listening and stay tuned.